Hello, and welcome to this edition of Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Jerry Dunleavy, strategist here at Judicial Watch, and your host today. Today, we are going to be discussing former FBI Director James Comey and Special Counsel Robert Mueller. We're specifically going to be honing in on the so-called Comey Memos and the way that they helped spark Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. So joining me today is attorney Michael Bekesha, who has been fighting in court for the truth, both about the Comey Memos and about the Special Counsel's investigation. So thank you very much for joining me today, Michael.
Absolutely.
So if we could start out our discussion here very briefly with explaining sort of how it came to be that James Comey plays such a prominent role in everything that's kind of happening today. If you want to start very briefly with kind of walking me through some of the major actions he took in 2016 that put him in such a prominent position today, if you would.
Sure. I mean, the first fact is he was FBI director.
Right.
That's a prominent position to begin with, and so that's why he was in the middle of it all. You know, the FBI at some point during the election process started investigating Hillary Clinton's use of a personal email server, and since he was FBI director, he, in the end, was in charge of that investigation.
Right.
You know, he had a lot of, there were agents out there doing the investigative work, but the buck stopped with him. And so that's why he was in the middle of the election.
Right. And there are a few things that stand out. The exoneration draft letter, that speech that he gave exonerating Hillary Clinton, that sort of thing. Would you be able to just walk me through just a little bit about whether those were sort of usual, regular things in an investigation, if there was anything that sort of stood out there?
Sure. Nothing about the Hillary Clinton investigation was normal or ordinary. From the beginning, you had leaks of what was going on. You had an attorney general that was recommending that the investigation itself was to be called a matter instead of an investigation, so it didn't sound that bad. You had an attorney general meeting with the spouse of the person under investigation shortly towards the end of the investigation. And you had an FBI director that apparently was drafting an exoneration statement prior to interviewing some of the most important people related to the investigation. So there was nothing normal about it. And looking back, I think everybody agrees that it was unusual and unprecedented how it took place.
Yeah. And in the midst of the election there in October, there was a bit of an October surprise there with Comey's letter to Congress and that sort of thing. Would you be able to really quickly just go over what that letter represented and kind of connect it to some of the things that Judicial Watch uncovered this year or late in 2017?
Sure. The funny thing about the letter was Director Comey at the time thought he needed to update Congress and what was going on in the investigation because he had spoken publicly and openly testified before Congress earlier in the summer, made that big announcement saying that Hillary Clinton would not be prosecuted. You know, that's unheard of. So he realized, well, I'm talking about all this stuff publicly, and now the investigation is kind of reopened. It was reopened because the FBI was conducting a search of Anthony Weiner's laptop. They were looking for information there that probably shouldn't have been on anyone's computer.
Exactly.
Maybe some pictures. We don't need to go into that. But they realized while they were doing that there was a whole group of Hillary Clinton's State Department emails in there. And that wasn't part of the investigation that they were looking at the laptop for, so they needed to go get a new search warrant to search the State Department emails. And they did that, and so by doing so, they kind of reopened the investigation. And so Director Comey thought, well, we just reopened an investigation that I told the world was closed. I guess I need to do something about it.
Right. So
And
this was kind of the box that he put himself in by taking those steps in the summer. He was then...
He had to do something.
Right.
And we now know recently, we've learned that the FBI wasn't so sure what they should do with this new information. Andrew McCabe, the reporting goes, was adamant to try to prevent this reopening of the investigation from becoming public. And he actually sat on the information for a month before either he brought it to Comey or somehow a decision was made to make it public. And some of the irony is McCabe, it appears, was trying to protect Clinton, so he didn't want this information to become public, but by having it become public so much closer, a whole month closer to the election, it may have actually hurt her more than it would have had they released the information when they knew about it back in late September.
Right, so some of the timeline, some of the gaming out that they might have been trying to do actually might not have worked out the way that they had hoped.
It appears that way.
Yeah. So things seem to come to a head, and President Trump ends up getting elected.
Even though the FBI tried to prevent him from getting elected, apparently the bureaucracy wasn't able to prevent democracy from happening.
Right. So you end up with President Trump unexpectedly, and Comey still as the FBI director. That sort of moves us towards the so-called Comey Memos. Mm-hmm. Now, people hear about these a lot, but would you be able to go into actually some greater detail about what these memos were and why they started to play such a big role in all of this?
Sure. At some point between Election Day and January, when Director Comey met with President Trump for the first time, actually when they first met, he was still President-elect Trump, Director Comey decided that he thought President Trump would eventually lie about their meetings. And so Director Comey decided he needed to keep records, write memos after each instance of one-on-one meetings with the president to protect not only himself, Director Comey, but also the FBI from any future actions or statements that the president would make. And so Director Comey wrote as many as 9 memos between roughly January and April of 2017, kind of just laying out, this is what I just talked to the president about. Of those 9 memos, about 5 of them have been reported to have some sort of classified information in them. The other 4 didn't, but he was writing memos not because of any investigation that was going on, but because he wanted to protect the institution of the FBI.
And as he says, I believe, to protect himself as well.
Yes, he talked during his testimony, his very public testimony in front of Congress, that he wrote these memos also to protect himself.
Yeah. Now, as an aside, I think in one of the meetings with President Trump, he talked about the so-called Trump dossier, right? Mm-hmm. The Russian dossier, which he refers to in his letter to the Senate and in his Senate testimony as, I believe the word he uses twice, I think, is salacious, and I think he calls it unverified, or at least portions of it in his Senate testimony.
Yeah, and going to that a little bit. So there's been a lot of talk since last year that everybody thinks it's completely wrong for the FBI director to be meeting one-on-one with President Trump, and President Trump shouldn't have been meeting with the FBI director one-on-one. Mm-hmm. However, the first time they met together alone, the 2 of them, was at the request of the FBI director, at the request of Director Comey. Uh-huh. So Director Comey was the one that initiated one-on-one contact between the 2 individuals, between him and President Trump. So it's just a little surprising to hear Director Comey after the fact say, well, it was really inappropriate for the president to talk to me when the Attorney General wasn't around.
Yeah, because Mr. Comey himself was reaching out to the president to set up meetings like this.
He was, and I believe one of the earliest meetings, if not the first one, was when there was a big group of people in the Oval Office, and he waited till everybody else left before he talked to President Trump about the dossier.
Interesting. And then the dossier, of course, has gone on to play whatever various roles it's played in this investigation.
It's opposition research that has grown and grown, and time will tell, where the dossier ends.
Yeah. So let's get back to the memos just to hone in here a little bit, because this is kind of where Judicial Watch's investigation and litigation will begin. Is so Comey writes these memos, at least 9 of them, and he ends up being fired by President Trump May 9th of 2017. And then these memos that he's been writing, what happens to them next?
Sure, because it makes perfect sense when you have classified information and information between a president and FBI director, and somebody's fired. Of course, the only thing you then do is give it to your buddy to leak it to the New York Times. So, former Director Comey was extremely unhappy that he was fired. So he took government property with him. He took memos with him. At least one had classified information in it, and handed it over to a law professor friend of his. And he said during his testimony that he turned it over so that it would be made public, so that a special counsel would be appointed.
Yeah, his direct quote that I have is he said 2 separate things. He said, my judgment was that I needed to get it out into the public square. And he says, I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. I didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to do it because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if he gave it to the media or somebody he gave it to gave to the media. I mean, he leaked information he wasn't authorized to leak. He wasn't authorized to provide that information. He should have left. Much like how when Hillary Clinton was no longer Secretary of State, she should have left her 60,000 emails at the State Department. Director Comey should have left his memos at the FBI. But apparently he did it. He took them with him and then decided to leak them.
Yeah, and this seems to be a bit of a consistent problem, right? Is what Comey was investigating Hillary Clinton for, and then what he ended up doing.
It is. I mean, the other thing, a bigger problem that Judicial Watch sees is Judicial Watch fights to get access to records. We want to know, especially senior level officials at agencies, what records they're relying on to make decisions, what records, they're communicating with one another. Let's have transparency, piece together what agencies are doing. So we ask for the records, and we're denied. The government doesn't want to turn over those records. However, senior level officials appear to be able to take those same records when they leave office and then use them however they want. It seemed as though Hillary Clinton may have been using some of those records related to the Clinton Foundation. Director Comey used these records to try and get a special counsel appointed. Most definitely, he's getting a lot of money for a book he's writing. So we're probably going to see more about those memos and other records he had scattered throughout the book he's writing. And, Judicial Watch has also sued the FDIC and their former chairwoman, Sheila Bair, because she went and wrote a book and used records to help write the book and made money off of it. And we had a client that asked for the exact same records because he was doing academic research, writing a book about the financial crisis, wanted access to the records, and that agency said no. So these are problems we see all the time.
Yeah, I mean, people in high levels denying the information to that's when it's requested through, proper legal channels, but then
And then using them to make personal gain.
Right.
And that's what you had here. So Judicial Watch, on behalf of itself, as well as the Daily Caller News Foundation, has sued the FBI for the Comey memos, the 9 Comey memos. And we believe they should be made available to the public because Director Comey has publicly testified about the contents of every single one of those memos. We could go through his testimony and point out, this is what he said, this is what the president said, this is what they talked about on specific days during specific meetings. And the government fought us on that. The Trump administration is still fighting us to not release the Comey memos. Just last week, unfortunately, the court agreed with the government. The court said that the release of these memos will harm the Mueller investigation. We don't think that's true at all. So just today, we appealed that determination, that decision by the federal court.
Now, walk me through why the court would even consider ruling something like that. So the Comey memos they're written by former Director Comey. They're taken out of the FBI. They're leaked to his friend, who then reads them to the New York Times. Results in a special counsel being appointed the very next day. But then these memos are now off limits from then on. How did that end up happening?
It's off limits to the public.
Right.
But, Comey can leak it and provide it to any of his friends. So I guess the moral of the story here is we should go try to be friends with Director Comey because we'll be able to go then see the records, see the memos.
Right.
But, the court ruled that the government argued that the release of the memos would harm Mueller's investigation, that it would interfere with the special counsel's investigation into Russian collusion. And with that information, the court basically said, well, the government's telling me it's going to harm the investigation. Who am I to question that determination? And so the court ruled against us. But because of all the information that's already public, we believe that the ruling was not correct, and so we're appealing it.
Yeah, because this is information that the New York Times got, that Comey testified to, that was used in various ways to make things happen, like a special counsel. And
yeah, he testified about it. You know, go read his testimony. One of the arguments we made on behalf of the Daily Caller News Foundation was that the judge should look at the memo, look at Comey's testimony, and see if anything's still secret. And if nothing's still secret, the information should be released. It's unclear if the court actually did that, but that's what we recommended. That's what we suggested. We know the court, based on our suggestion, did ask for all the memos to be turned over to the judge. So at least somebody else has now seen the memos.
Yeah.
So I guess you have to be a friend of Director Comey, the New York Times, or a federal judge to see the memos.
Unfortunately, we're none of those three.
We are not, and the special counsel. We can add that.
That's right. Okay, so speaking of the special counsel, so we have our lawsuits trying to get to the truth about the Comey memos that a bunch of people, like you said, have seen. And we're also trying to get answers surrounding the special counsel investigation itself that, in Comey's own words, was sparked by these memos being leaked. So walk me through what do we want to know about the Mueller investigation, and why do you think Judicial Watch deserves some answers on this?
We want transparency. So we know that the special counsel was appointed last year. We know that he has a team of roughly 16 to 17 people working with him now. We know that generally they're spending about $1 million a month on their investigation. But Judicial Watch wants to know what the planned budget was. So last year, as required by the Justice Department regulations, the rules that are in place for the special counsel had to come up with a budget. Like any other organization, they had to submit a budget to the Justice Department, a proposed budget, saying this is what we plan to spend for the year. The media reported that this budget was submitted to the Justice Department, but at the time, the reports were also, well, the Justice Department isn't going to make this budget available to the public. And so Judicial Watch saw that and said, well, we should ask for it. We want to know how much Special Counsel Mueller thinks it's going to cost for him to conduct his investigation. We didn't get any response in response to our FOIA request, so we sued.
Yeah.
And we finally got a response a couple weeks ago, and the response was, we're not giving you any information. They said that the release of how much money Mueller asked for would harm the investigation, and also that it was deliberative in nature, that it would interfere with the decision-making process. Of course, the government didn't really identify what that decision was and what process it would interfere with. So they really just seem to be preventing access to the budget because they don't want the public to know how big of a number it is.
Interesting. Now, so where does Judicial Watch go from here? Because outside of the budget itself, there have been pretty prominently the discussion about Peter Strzok, who had been a member of the Mueller
until he was kicked off.
Until he was kicked off because of these the texts that have come to light, some of which have come to light, some of which they said that were missing but then found. But
it's all very confusing what's going on. So Judicial Watch is trying to get to the bottom of it. You know, we really can't rely on Congress to have all that great oversight. Judicial Watch tends to get better results. So we're right in the middle there, filing federal lawsuits and arguing in federal court that we need access to this information. So we've sent requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, asking for all text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. We have sued over that. Hopefully we'll have some answers soon on that front. We have sued for Andrew McCabe's text messages. And we just want to know what text messages are out there and have them argue, have the government say, tell a federal court, oh, we've lost text messages. There was that report that text messages were missing. We filed suit, and then later that day, there were reports that the text messages were found. Coincidence? I'm not so sure.
Right. I mean, and there wasn't really a moment when we here at Judicial Watch actually thought that they were missing, because
of course not. I mean, we had that with the IRS. They said the Lois Lerner emails were missing until they weren't. They said with the State Department, they said Hillary Clinton's emails were missing until they weren't. I mean, time and again, the government has told the public, oh, we're missing records. And then Judicial Watch gets into court and the government changes its tune.
So what success do you see coming from this? We're pushing hard to get information surrounding the Comey Memos. We're working to keep the Mueller investigation accountable, trying to get to the bottom of the Strzok and Page texts, trying to get McCabe's. There, a lot going on there.
There is. We stay busy here.
Yeah. There's obviously a lot going on, but obviously we've had a lot of success in the past. Where do you see things moving forward from here? And specifically, what do you see a chance of our appeal in the?
I always think we're going to have success. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't do my job if I thought that we were going to lose all the time. Look, we're pushing these issues. We're holding the government accountable. We're forcing the government to answer questions. They're going to have to answer to a federal court about whether or not these text messages are really missing. Without us, the government can say whatever they want because, as we've seen, Congress doesn't really hold executive officials accountable. They it just doesn't work that well. That's a political process. We go through a legal process. So, the government's going to have to account for text messages. They're going to have to account for any emails. They're going to have to, in the end, make a determination about whether or not they can withhold all of this information from the public that is leaking day after day out of different executive agencies and Congress. What we do and why we fight the way we fight is to make all this information available to the public, and then let the public be able to decide what is going on and whether it should be or shouldn't be going on.
Right, because a lot of the leaks that are coming out, you get a little bit here, a little bit there, designed to push this narrative or push
it's
that.
all drip, 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 and
Right.
Our goal and our mission and what we fight for is to get every single record released. That can be released. So do it in a legal, lawful way, and we don't go away until the very last record is released.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you joining us today. I obviously wish you the best of luck as we continue to fight all of these battles in court, because these are.
It would be weird if you didn't wish me good luck.
It would be very weird. But because these are big. I mean, the Comey memos, like you said, helped spark the Mueller investigation, and these are things that that we think that the American people deserve. Really do deserve some answers on. And like you said, it's about transparency across the board. We want the Comey memos, we want Mueller's budget, we want Strzok's text and Page's text and McCabe's text, because it's all about getting through sort of the spin and the leaks and everything like that everyone has their sort of agenda, and we just want it all out there, and then people can decide for themselves. So, well, I thank you for joining us today, Michael. Obviously, we're going to have you back as the battles in court continue. So, and thank you very much for joining us as well today for this edition of Inside Judicial Watch. Continue to follow all of our work. That Judicial Watch is committed to getting the answers, to fighting through the spin, fighting through the leaks, and get to the truth. Until next time, I'm the host of Inside Judicial Watch, Jerry Dunleavy. Have a great day.